Welcome to today's video of How To with Paul. Our previous video we have showed you how to remove the distributor. Today on this video I will be showing you how to remove the points and install the Igniter 2 Pertronix into your distributor. There'll be another video that shows you how to reinstall and time the car when you're finished. This is a 1957 Chevy and we will be doing this conversion. Stay tuned. Okay, welcome back to How To with Paul. We have our distributor out of our 1957 Chevy. We're going to be converting to the Pertronix Igniter 2 ignition. I've gone ahead and I've removed the distributor, and I've showed how to do that in the previous video. So if you haven't seen that and you don't know how to take out your distributor, there's a video on that. I'll also be doing a video on how to install it. So now we're going to get down to the meat and potatoes, though, of what we came to do, which was go ahead and replace the original points with an electronic ignition setup. My reason for doing this is just simply for ease, for less maintenance. I don't have any problem with points. I have used points for many, many years. I don't have an issue adjusting them. I just find that, maybe it'd be nice not to have to worry about the points dying on you on the road and just converting to electronic ignition and maybe getting a little bit more stable fuel economy and performance out of the engine, because points just aren't that great at doing that. That's why they've changed it over the years. Anyway, let's go ahead and get right to it. Sorry about that. We'll readjust. We're going to go ahead and disassemble it. I've taken the liberty to go ahead and start disassembling just so I would know if there's anything we need to run into, any special tools, anything like that. First thing you're going to want to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at taking off your rotor. I've already loosened up the screws, so there's just the two screws holding that down. They're already loosened, so that's why they came out fairly easy for me, but in the ease of saving time, I wanted to do that just so we're not eating up a bunch of time with me loosening screws that are kind of obvious. The next thing you're going to want to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to want to remove the distributor shaft, okay? The reason for this is because there is some spacing potential issues that you may have to do to keep this from hitting the new sensor. And also, it just makes life a lot easier working on the distributor. So, at the other end of the distributor, you have this drift pin inside here, which I have already taken out. But notice also there is a mark here. This mark is important because if you put this on the wrong way, the distributor is not going to want to go in correctly. So what I like to do is I take that mark there, and then I just put a Sharpie mark in several places on the top of this same shaft. That way I know that it's going to go on. So I've marked it red with Sharpie. We'll mark it again because my hands have kind of already worn it off. So we're just going to mark it again. I even mark it down here just for giggles. Just anywhere that I could think that, I could see the mark, just to make sure that that doesn't get mixed up, because that can cause you all kinds of issues. So then you're just going to go ahead and you're going to set a piece of wood underneath your distributor here. You need to get yourself a drift pin that's the proper size, and you're just going to give that a couple good taps. I've already loosened it, so it's going to come out pretty easily. Okay, and then make sure you don't lose that pin. Keep that somewhere where you know where it is. Put it off to the side. We'll remove that. And now this will go ahead and slide right off. You may have to twist and turn a little bit. Pay attention to the spacers and how they came off and how they go on. I like to just set it aside just like that so I know exactly how it came off. That now will allow you to pull the shaft out of the distributor. So you just pull this straight out. You may have to rotate a little bit back and forth just to kind of let it slide on out. Okay, now that's gotten that completely out of the way for you. So now that you can actually get to your points and condenser and all the plates and stuff that we need to get to easily without having to fight with it. It's not necessary. You can do this with this on, but like I said, there is a potential of spacing issue. So this is why they recommend that you take out the shaft, because you may have to space it to keep it from going down. So the next thing I'm going to do is you'll notice underneath the distributor, you got your wire that comes in. There's a grommet in there. I'm just going to go ahead and remove that grommet and get it out of my way because it's kind of a pain in the butt. So you may have to break it out of there with a pair of pliers. You can cut the wire. There's a million different ways you could do it. Either way, you're not going to be reusing this wire or that grommet with the kit. So you can just go ahead and do what you got to do to get that out of there. Now we'll go ahead and remove the points. So you just take out these screws. There's two screws that hold the points in. Keep the screws. You will need those. Here's your other screw. Go ahead and unscrew that one. And this one you only have to really loosen, and it'll go ahead and pop out of place because it's got a slotted fitting there. Then we'll go ahead and remove the condenser. Same thing. Just take the bolt out. Drop your screwdriver on camera so everybody thinks you're a talented technician. That's a joke. Hope you all love that. Remove that screw, and we'll keep it all off to the side. There's my screw. There's my points. Now you can see what's left is your tab. This tab is supposed to have a sponge in it so that you can grease it and keep the camshaft on the distributor itself lubricated to keep this from wearing. Well, gee, this one's 63 years old, probably never been replaced. It's disintegrated, it's gone. It's a non-issue. I'm not worried about it because we're not going to be utilizing this anymore, so it doesn't really matter. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to fish that wire through. Okay, you may have to turn it upside down because you may want to kind of wiggle the terminal through there and give it a little wiggle, and it should pop out of the distributor fairly easily. You can set those off to the side. You could throw them in the trash. You could do whatever you want to do with them. You're not going to need them again, but in case you do, there they are. Just a note, this is a good time to check your vacuum advance. If your vacuum advance is bad, this is the time to change it because you've already got the distributor half apart. The other thing that will hold this distributor in, or hold this plate in, and keep you from getting to these screws, as you can see, which are already difficult to get to, is this plate. This plate is held in, hopefully you can see this. There is a small clip that goes all the way around the outside of this. You could take your pick and you just pry that on out of there, and then this whole plate will come off. I don't need to remove it. I'm not going to do it, but the main thing is, after you've done that, then you can access these screws easily with no problem because you just take the plate and move it out to the side. There is a wire that will keep this together that connects to that. That is the ground wire. So make sure you don't break that. So this will just pull straight off and it'll pull out of the way, and then you can actually get to the screws to replace your vacuum advance if you need to. Okay, and when you put this clip back on, just be real careful with it. You kind of have to kind of make sure it's seated. Kind of push it in there, twist it around a little bit. It's really hard to see on the camera, so I'm not going to try too hard. But it's just a very, very small paper-thin clip that goes inside of a slot right here. Okay, so you just want to make sure that that's in there good and seated. Okay, so now we've got that done. We're going to move on to going ahead and installing our pickup. Okay, our pickup is going to go in the place of the points, which would be here and here, but we left this one screw in, so we're going to remove that screw. We didn't need to take it off for the points, but we will need to take it off to mount this plate in. So we're going to remove that, and you're going to see that this plate, okay, goes there. Now, some people accidentally want to try to do this, put it in the wrong place, but you'll see Chevy was kind of smart about it, and they kind of made the wires, the bolt pattern a little bit different, so they'll only fit one way. When you got both the screw holes fitting in there, then you know you've got it in the right place. Plus, noticing that the wires come from the same area that they came out of, that's another tip that'll keep you in the right place. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to put those two screws in. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and snug those down. Again, you don't want to kill them, but you want them nice and snug. We don't want them to back out. Some people like to use a little Loctite. I don't find it necessary. These have lock washers on the end of them, so they do a pretty good job of already staying in place. So you don't usually have to worry about those coming out of place. Okay, so there you go. Now you've got this module installed. The next thing you're going to do, which should be a little tricky, is fishing your wires down through that bottom hole that we were talking about. So this can be a little bit tricky, but I find it not that bad. I just try to work it way down, look through it so you can see the hole, fish the wire through, and there you go. I've got both wires coming through the bottom now. We're going to go ahead and pull those through, checking to make sure that it's not going to be in way of the mechanisms when it advances and moves, that it will not be contacting or rubbing anywhere we don't want it to rub. Okay, try to keep the wires nice and flat. That can be a little tricky, especially when your hands are kind of busy. That can prove to be a little challenging to twist this just the right way. Okay, so you just want to keep those, give yourself some room so it has some room to flex. It's got to stay inside of the distributor cap, which this will be the outer rim of that distributor cap, so we've got to make sure that that stays in place there. Okay, so this is a good place to put it, and then just leave your wires hanging out the bottom there, and we've gone ahead and done that. Okay, so now one of the trickier parts is installing the new magnetic pickup, which is this that comes with it. And according to the directions, they tell you to put it on when the distributor's together by doing this. Well, guess what? We've got the shaft out. We don't even have to do that. We're just going to slide it straight up, and the bolts will go directly through the original cap mounts, which, by the way, the directions do not say anything about this, and it took me a few seconds to figure out that this is exactly what needed to be done. So that these bolts will now come through the original screw holes that were originally holding the rotor down. Okay, so we're going to just put a hand on that. We're going to go ahead and assemble the distributor. We're just going to push that back through, wiggle a little bit, give it a little twist here and there, because there are bushings and they should be tight. And here's what I was talking about. We have contact already. Okay, so I know that we're going to have to do some adjustment on this plate, and they talk about it by just bending this plate and giving yourself at least 10 thousandths to 60 thousandths clearance here. So if you do not have that, by pushing this distributor down, you can see that it's actually contacting, and it'll actually wear and it'll actually destroy this. So we don't want that. So we're going to pull this back out. Okay, and I'm going to bend this tab a little. May have to pull them back out, but I think I can do it like this. And we're just going to give that a little twist to bend it back down. I may have went a little too far. I think I did, so I'm going to back it off just a touch. I'll bend it back up a little. It's a little tricky. Okay, that looks to me like it's fairly flat now, which is probably what we want. We're going to go ahead and take that shaft. We'll stick that shaft back through again, and we'll take a look and make sure that there is no contact. Okay. Okay, so we still have what appears to be a little bit of contact there. And now that I'm looking at it, it looks as if it's actually tilted up a little bit, which we definitely want to correct. So again, we're going to keep going back and forth on this until we get this gap between here and here to between 10 and 60 thousandths, and definitely not touching. So you can see we still have contact. I'm going to turn off the camera so I could do this. That way you'll see what I've done, but my hands are just a little bit too busy right now, and I just need to concentrate on what I'm doing. So I'm going to simply bend this tab down until we do have proper clearance. Okay, welcome back to How To with Paul. We are working on putting an electronic Pertronix Igniter 2 electronic ignition into my 57 Chevy's distributor. I had to stop the filming so that I could use my hands and get this gap correct between the module and the sensors. I have done that now. It's very hard to see, I'm sure, but the gap is proper in between here now. So we're going to go ahead and complete the installation, or reassembly of the distributor, I should say. So one of the things they talk about in the instructions on this, and it's actually kind of important, is that when you reinstall your gear onto your distributor, you need to make sure that the end play doesn't exceed 60 thousandths, because if it does exceed 60 thousandths there, it's not going to pick up. So by installing the washers back in the original positions that they were, this washer was facing up towards the gears. You can see that they go up into that gear. This is the original washer. I had already put the gear back on and checked it. It was too loose. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to install one of the shims. They give you a few shims to play with. I'm going to install one shim onto here, and then I'm going to reinstall the gear. I did try already off camera. I did do it with the two spacers in between the gear, and it was indeed a little too tight for my comfort. So I decided to go back to the one, which is a little looser than I want, but it is within spec. So we're going to go ahead and go with that. So now that we've installed that gear back on, flipped it over, make sure, remember, we talked about the mark. So hard to do this. You got the mark that was on our gear. And actually, I'm making a mistake right now. Okay. Yeah. Remember, the gear goes up. I almost made a mistake and put this back on. I went to grab something to eat. I was feeling a little hungry, so I stopped to eat, and I almost made a big mistake. So pay attention to that. Make sure that your gear is on the top portion of the distributor. I almost made the mistake, so anybody can almost make that mistake. And looking at the gear, you've got this mark, not the hole, but the mark, where we had our red mark that we marked at the top to make sure that those are lined up and it's going into the proper position. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start to tap this into place. Okay, you can kind of wiggle it around, move it around a little bit to make sure that it's actually seated in place before you start hammering on it. Okay, we just want that to be flush. We don't want it to push through the other side. If you keep hammering on it, obviously you could push it through the other side, and that would be kind of pointless. So, going back to what we were talking about with the gap, they want to make sure that you have no more than 60 thousandths gap in between here. I've gone ahead and installed that extra shim. Like I said, I tried 2. It was a little too tight, so I didn't know that 1 is going to be proper, but you may have to do this a couple times and take it apart. And I have about a 35 thousandths gap. So that is within spec. And if I put this other shim in there, it would have been too tight. It was only about 3 or 4 thousandths tightness here, and that could cause excessive heat, and it could cause it to burn up, which you don't want. So this is actually proper. This is what we want. We're at 35 thousandths. That's good. The other thing we want to do now that we've gone ahead and we've got our distributor basically back together, we're going to go ahead and install our rotor. And this is also going to be important to check one other thing I'm going to show you in just a moment. Notice that the rotor, this is something that comes up with people. There is a round peg, there is a square peg. If you look on the distributor, there's a round peg, there's a square peg. You could force these on the wrong way. You don't want to do that. So you just want to make sure that they do go on easily and they are in the proper position. And with the kit, you will have chrome washers and you will have the gold washers. These gold washers are intended to be a spacer to put in between here in case you need to tighten the gap between here. I've already checked this. It's a little hard to see on camera, but with it all tightened down, I'm actually proper. If I was to install these, it would be a little too close for my comfort. They give you many of them, so depending on how much clearance you have, you could decide on how many spacers that you would need to put between this and the plate to tighten this gap. I'm not going to use any because I like the way it's set up now. I think I'm good. It's within the 60 thousandths that the manufacturer says they need, no more than 60 thousandths. So we're going to go ahead and install this rotor. So now it's the chrome washers. Okay, they're a little bit thicker, they're a little bit heavier. Those will go on first, and then your lock nuts will go on. Okay, so I spun that one on. Do the same thing on the opposite. We'll spin those on, and I'm just going to take my socket and I'm just going to snug them because I just want to double check everything. I don't want to crank it tight yet, but I want to double check, make sure everything's spinning freely, and I want to double check the gap and make sure that our gap is actually correct. So now looking at our sensor and our magnetic pickup, we're going to spin the shaft and we're just going to take a look at it and make sure that there's no close contact spots. There's one spot here that's a little lower than the rest, and this is still within 10 thousandths, so we're good. Although if I was to put a spacer in there, it would be too tight, and this was the area that I was saying would be too tight. That's why I decided to go without. So I'm going to go ahead and spin it around a few times. Just take a look and make sure everything looks like it's clearing. Now you also want to make sure that you pull this shaft down so it's at its tightest position as you're spinning it. Okay, we know that that's good, and then you also want to push it forward and check the gap as it goes there, and it's not supposed to be more than 60 thousandths, which I am right about at 60 thousandths. So it's pretty close, but it's within spec of what it should be. And again, if I put a spacer down there, it would have been too much. So this is where I'm going to leave it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tighten up these nuts on the rotor. And again, just don't get crazy with them. Just snug. You don't want to break them. Just snug. Don't know if you can see that, but okay, so I've gone ahead and I've snugged those down. And I'm just going to go back and forth a couple times, just make sure they feel nice. Okay, they feel nice and snug. I'm happy with that. I've made sure that my screws are tight that are holding down the new module. There is no bolt that's needed anymore that holds this, what would have been the condenser. We don't need that anymore because that's all been removed. So we're taking that out. We can also, at this point, if we wanted to, we could remove that sponge holder. Okay, that would have been holding the sponge to keep this shaft greased. I'm just going to leave it in there so it doesn't get lost in case I ever wanted to put it back in. I don't know why I would, but in case I ever did, it'll stay in place there. I'm just going to leave it. It's not hurting nobody. We'll leave it there. And then the last thing to make sure is that you reinstall that rubber grommet. I think I talked about that in the other video, but you want to make sure that you have your rubber grommet here so that these wires do not wear and end up touching and grounding out on the chassis of the distributor itself. The other thing to check, sorry I keep kicking my camera, is to make sure that when your vacuum advance works, that these wires aren't going to get pinched or cut up anywhere. So this is good placement for these wires. There is space between, so it's not actually rubbing on it. Although it looks really tight, there actually is good space. You probably can't see that on the camera. So that's it. This distributor's done. It's ready to go back in. Stay tuned to watch the video of how to reinstall it. Thanks a lot.